You're Richard Francis Gray, presently of 14 Chatterton Avenue, Fulchester.
Yes, I am. It's a temporary address. It's my mother's place, where I've been living with my 2 sons ever since my own house was destroyed by fire.
What is your relationship to the accused, please?
I've instituted divorce proceedings against her, but she's my wife.
Exactly, Mr. Gray. And since the accused is still your wife, I must make quite sure you understand you are in no way obliged to testify against her.
Thank you, my lord. I do understand that.
You come here today of your own free will to give your testimony.
Completely of my own free will, yes.
Good, thank you. Right, carry on, Mr. Lloyd.
Mr. Gray, what's the relationship between you and your wife been like over the last few years? Happy?
No, very bad, growing steadily worse.
What was the main reason for this?
Difficult to say precisely. All I know for sure is that it's been very difficult to live with my wife over the last few years. Her criticisms have almost driven me out of my mind, and her demands have been insupportable.
What demands, exactly?
What demands on my time, my presence? I had to punch clocks for her, if you see what I mean. Well, for example, if I was 5 minutes late home from work in the evening, then I was neglecting her, and if I refused to cooperate with her whim of the moment, say, shifting the furniture, and she was a great shifter of furniture in certain moods, then I was being obstructive and unsympathetic towards her problems.
And was this different from the original relationship the two of you had enjoyed?
Oh, yes, completely different. Yet I hadn't changed as far as I was aware. I did everything to show my concern for Fiona. I tried to love her, and everything was as right as rain until after Adrian was born. That was about 5 years ago, and then there was a slow turning against me.
I see. Well, I now have some rather more intimate questions to ask you, Mr. Gray. How long is it, please, since you and Mrs. Gray lived together as husband and wife?
Up until the time of the fire, we'd been strangers under the same roof for the best part of a year. After a particularly nasty scene, my wife made it obvious to me that she wanted nothing more to do with me in that way. We still went out together. We kept up appearances, but nothing more.
It was your wife who rejected you. You did not reject her.
Oh, there's no argument about that at all. I did my best, in fact, to bring about a reconciliation, to get a new understanding going. I didn't like the situation the way it was, and I hope I was patient.
So through a difficult year, you adopted a policy of toleration and of hope.
Yes, that's right.
Did your wife do something of the same?
No. On the morning of June 28th last, just as I was leaving for work, my wife announced to me that for the past 3 months or so she'd had a lover. A man called Brinsley, it appears, Gilbert Brinsley. He was a tutor at a local art group.
How did you react to this information, Mr. Gray?
Well, it took me completely by surprise. I was astonished, and then I was deeply angry. I told my wife that this meant the finish between us. After all I'd put up with over the last few years, that this was too much. I said I would start divorce proceedings that same day and that I would see my lawyer then. I would also make arrangements for the 2 boys to come and live with me and my mother's in the meantime.
Why that, Mr. Gray? Why did you want to take the boys with you?
Well, it seemed right under the circumstances. I mean, the home could hardly be considered to be the most improving atmosphere anymore.
Did your wife object in any way?
Yes, but only to make the right noises, I think. She was more concerned with herself than for the children.
In general, Mr. Gray, what was your wife's attitude towards these children?
I think she disliked them. It was a growing attitude, turning to hate. I think she resented their existence because in her mind...
Just 1 moment, Mr. Gray. Members of the jury, you must disregard that last remark of Mr. Gray's. What he thinks about his wife's view of her children is not evidence.
Now, when you returned home from work on the evening of June 28th last year, Mr. Gray, your house was in flames and the fire brigade was fighting the fire. Is that correct?
Yes.
What did you do, please?
Well, at first I couldn't believe it. I just stood there, staring at the flames. And then I saw the 2 boys being hurried out of the gate by Mrs. Blaney, a neighbour. And they were frightened, and they were crying. And Fiona was there, and she was crying too, and I just rushed at her, and I shouted at her, "What have you done now? What now?" And she came straight back at me with, "It's what you've always wanted, isn't it? The finish between us. Well, now I've done you a favour."
Now, the next question is very important, Mr. Gray. What state was your wife in at this time?
State, I'm not sure I know what you mean.
Well, did she recognise you the moment you arrived, for instance?
Yes, recognised me. Yes, she did.
Did she hear what you said? Did she understand you?
Yes.
There was no confusion, in other words. She didn't seem dazed or unaware of her surroundings.
No, not at all. No, I had to ask Mrs. Helder from next door to take her away and look after her while I tried to get other things sorted out.
Mr. Gray, why precisely did you shout, "What have you done now?" to your wife? It's as though you immediately took it for granted she must have had something to do with the fire.
My lord, I knew straight away that Fiona had everything to do with the fire.
Oh, indeed? Why was that?
Because it's what she's always threatened to do. Time and again, when we'd argue, she'd finish up with, "Anyway, I hate this house. It's your house, it's not my house, and for 2 pins, I could set a match to it."
Thank you, Mr. Gray. No further questions.
Miss Tate.
Mr. Gray, perhaps in the first place you'd better tell us why you chose to give evidence against your wife today.
I don't have a choice anymore. Valuable property has been destroyed. Life has been placed in jeopardy. I don't mean only the lives of my own 2 sons who were in the house when it was fired, but, well, other lives. The whole neighborhood could have been destroyed.
Mr. Gray, did you really take your wife seriously on any occasion when she said that she hated your house and for 2 pins she'd burn it down?
In the event, she did burn it down.
Nevertheless, if you had taken your wife seriously, then wouldn't you have taken some steps to make sure she hadn't the chance to burn it down?
I'm not sure what those steps would be. Anyway, it was rather a case of a boy who cried wolf in the end. Fiona just threatened, and I just ceased to bother about it.
Now, you and your wife have been married how many years, did you say?
8 years, nearly 9.
Your eldest son, Terence, is 7, and Adrian, I think you told us, is nearly 5.
Yes, that's right.
And things were as right as rain between you and your wife until after Adrian was born. So that leaves approximately 4 years in which this relationship seems to have deteriorated. Now, surely there must have been some reason for this?
I suppose so, but as far as I was concerned, Fiona just turned against me, that's all.
Started to criticize and make excessive demands on you.
Yes.
Didn't you ever ask yourself why this might be, Mr. Gray?
Yes, of course I did, but I couldn't come up with an answer then, and I still can't.
It didn't seem to you that perhaps some critical change was taking place in your wife?
Change? What change?
Well, how had she been before this turning against you began?
Oh, reasonable, agreeable, affectionate, concerned for me.
Malleable?
What?
Had your wife always gone along with whatever you said, perhaps, without complaint?
Yes, of course.
She never questioned your decisions?
Fiona didn't like making decisions for herself. Even the simplest domestic ones could throw her into a terrible state sometime. Anyway, she knew that I always acted in her best interests.
In her best interests, of course. And it was in her best interest that you retained number 7 Adelaide Close as your exclusive property, did it, Mr. Gray?
Sorry?
Well, could your wife in any real sense be called a part owner of her family home?
I don't know what that means. We were husband and wife, and it was our home.
Yet your wife did ask you if you would put the property in her name as well as your own, and you refused.
My lord, I'm not sure what esoteric purpose in the defence's grand design these last few questions are meant to serve, but to me they seem plainly irrelevant.
Yes, Miss Tate, I too would like to know where this line of interrogation is leading you. As far as I'm aware, the witness could never have been under any obligation to put the family home in his wife's name as well as his own. The fact that he did not do so, even though she requested it, is nothing to do with the case.
With respect, my lord, I'm suggesting that this matter assumed exaggerated importance in my client's mind and consequently led her to extravagant action.
Oh, dear me, Miss Tate, I do hope we're not in for a deal of psychological digging in this case. Now, you know as well as I do that any plea of diminished responsibility is quite out of the question here. If you do not contest that the accused built the fire and struck the match which destroyed the family home, then all you can do is try to show that she didn't know what she was doing when she performed those actions.
And that, my lord, is precisely what I'm trying to show, that my client acted automatically without true consciousness when she burned down the home.
Miss Tate, you will not do that by arguing about who held the deeds to the property and whether or not it was a good thing. They may be arguments for a meeting of the Women's Rights Association, but certainly not for this court.
Yes, of course, my lord. Thank you. Mr. Gray, did you hate your wife?
Hate her?
Yes.
Of course not. I did everything to prove that I loved her.
And yet you thought her attitude towards the children altogether deficient. And for something like 12 months prior to the burning of the house, there was no sexual contact between you.
That was her idea, not mine.
Oh, but you didn't let her get away with it, surely.
What?
Well, I say that, as a sensitive man, you must have realized that your wife, in behaving as she did, was behaving neurotically. Now, surely you treated her with some particular consideration? Powers of persuasion, even?
I don't know what that means. What are you suggesting I should have done in such a situation? Raped her? I mean, what can a man do in a situation like that? When a woman says no, she says no.
Oh, perhaps. And anyway, there's always plenty of fish in the sea as far as...
Lord!
Miss Tate, that type of offensive remark is precisely what we should try to avoid in this case, surely.
With respect, my lord, the point is that the witness himself may not realize yet he did neglect his wife, so that when she joined this art society, she was more or less forced into her affair with Gilbert Brinsley.
She was not forced into an affair with Gilbert Brinsley. She went into it coldly and deliberately as a rejection of me.
Following what could only be interpreted as a similar rejection by you, Mr.
All
Gray.
right, perhaps I did come to hate Fiona in a way, to reject her. But it was very difficult, you see. You couldn't depend on Fiona for adult responses. You had to see to her constantly. Well, that's it. Being married to Fiona was like being married to a demanding child, to a little girl who refused to grow up.
case of the Queen against Grey will be resumed tomorrow in the Crown Court.